All right, welcome to NNP Symposium. This is the 1 p.m. session on building your numismatic reference library in 2021 with Kellen Hoard. With increasing digitization, recent shifts in the hobby, and a wide variety of new books and magazines being published, it can be difficult to identify what you should include in your numismatic library today. This presentation will guide you through the process of building a strong, useful library in 2021 that will supplement your collection and remain an essential resource for years to come. So with that, Kellen, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Len. Thank you. Well, welcome to the presentation here. Len pretty excellently already described kind of the aim of this presentation as I've been looking across the numismatic landscape over the last several months and a couple of years. What I've noticed is, yeah, really how you approach building a really good reference library to supplement your collection, it has shifted. And so as we enter 2021 now, I guess we're basically 3 months in, thinking about what makes a good reference library, whether or not you've already started it or are just looking to begin now and haven't really launched on that adventure. Always good to kind of get into the mindset of, how do I acquire pieces that help me become a better collector? So we can, I guess, just kind of jump into it here. And the first thing to think about is what is the importance of a numismatic, or of a reference library, rather, a numismatic reference library? Why does it even matter to have one? And so most of us have heard kind of the saying, like, buy the book before the coin, right? And that was coined a couple decades ago. And basically what it means is, before you're going to make any kind of purchase of a coin or paper money or token or metal or whatever else, it's good to kind of have a base of knowledge about it, to not only be a better buyer of that coin and go into the transaction more knowledgeable and more capable, but also to be a better appreciator of the piece once you've acquired it, right? To be able to understand the context for this and really truly appreciate what you've purchased. And so not only being a better buyer or even seller, but then also a better collector and a better numismatist. And so most of us, that's kind of the foundation of making sure that you have that information base before you really engage with that core numismatic collection that you're building. But it's important to not solely acquire information about just what you're collecting, not just about the series that you're collecting or your areas of interest. It's important to have kind of a broader range of knowledge, a broader range of things to look back to, information to be able to reference. And so building a broad reference library actually allows you to do that. And it allows you to become not just a better collector by having not only a greater appreciation for the pieces that you're collecting and a better knowledge base, but also a better learner and make sure that you are actually able to acquire information and retain information better, and also a better educator. You can learn all this stuff. You can be the best buyer in the numismatic market. You can be the best collector in the numismatic market. But it's always important to pass on what you learn and what you know to other collectors, whether they be younger ones or your peers, because that's part of the joy of numismatics, right? Is being able to share what you know and demonstrate that in a variety of ways. And so having a reference library is actually really key in making you a better educator to others for a couple of reasons, which I'll get into later in the presentation. And a quality reference library doesn't just supplement your core collection, assuming that you're not a bibliophile. It doesn't just supplement your core collection. It actually can become quite valuable and quite independent in its own right, especially as it grows. Having a solid base of these pieces of literature have both monetary value, but also truly like informational value, which is an underappreciated aspect of any collection, and whether it be stamps or books or coins. That informational value is quite an important thing, and I think as you build your reference library, you'll begin to recognize, wow, this really actually isn't just a supplement, but its own independent thing. So where are we at right now? We're in 2021. What does that even mean in terms of the context of building a reference library? And so the first thing to consider is that there's a lot of new publications, both physical publications that had been printed and also ones that went straight to virtual publication. And these are coming from both established publishers like Whitman. Heritage has their own printing arm. They're coming from these established publishers, and quite kind of very quickly. And then there's a wide variety of things, whether that be general references or Bauer's books or whatever else it may be, or even sometimes specialized publications. There's just a lot coming out. But even more volume is coming from self-publishers, and self-publishing today is easier than ever, especially to virtual. But even if you want to go to physical copies, it's not that hard to basically go through Amazon or some other self-publishing service. You get a copyright on it, and you can sell your book. It's pretty easy, just using the internet. And if you're going digital, even easier. And so what happens is you just get a lot of volume of books. And if any of you read like the Asylum, basically every week there's 1, 2, 3 books, new books that have been published or updated versions of the Red Book or whatever else it may be. There's a lot of stuff being published all the time. So it's hard to kind of narrow down exactly what should be part of that reference library. There's a lot of books that are interesting, and I encourage you to acquire them on your own, but what can form that core reference library, it's hard to narrow that down with so much content just simply coming out. There's also really major shifts in the hobby due to COVID-19, and some of you may have been tracking these, but the big one that I've noticed is that there's really an increased interest in the hobby. We see a lot of new collectors coming in. I think the ANA said they had something like a 20% spike in membership, and auction prices are up right now. But there's a couple caveats to that, and the main one is there long-term sustainability to this increase in interest and prices? I don't think we know. Hopefully, or at least some of it is retained, but 20% increase in membership, I don't know. And so there's uncertainty in that regard. Also, there's the uncertainty of whether these new collectors will become numismatists, right? There's that bar between being a collector, a casual collector who's kind of surface level, maybe more profit oriented, and then becoming more of a numismatist, right? Kind of that more scholarly side of the hobby. Will they have that translation over? And that will have ramifications as well in terms of both the literature market, but also just how our hobby adapts and shifts, and that will also play into your reference library. And then how will organizations respond? And that includes both like clubs and nonprofits like the ANA, but also for-profits like the grading companies and the auction companies. How will they respond and adjust to these shifts? Again, I'm not really sure yet. We'll have to see over these next couple of years here. But where we're at right now is really an uncertain area in that regard. A little bit more about where we're at. And this is the big one, and kind of what brings us here today, is that the digitization of information is ever more prevalent. It's everywhere, and digitizing is really picking up pace. Of course, the Newman portal, which is why we're here today, they're scanning all of these different pieces of literature and all of this information. That really shifts the dynamic of what you should include in your reference library, because if it's just available with a couple clicks on the Newman portal, how do I balance that out when acquiring pieces for my own library physically? And then of course social outlets like the PCGS forums, or there's a huge collector base on Instagram, so different, and Facebook, so different social media. Information is really quickly accessible via these social media outlets. You don't have to wait anymore for a convention 3 months in the future to ask somebody. You can just shoot them an email. You don't have to write a letter and wait days or weeks for a reply. You just shoot them an email or ask someone on Instagram, or make a forum post about it, and you're going to hear responses in a couple minutes, maybe, or a couple hours. So that information side of things, and of course reference libraries are primarily for information, that information side of things has changed. And so how does that also affect what you should put into your library? Newsletters too. I mentioned the Asylum before. There's of course a bunch of other newsletters put out by dealers and collectors, etc. How does that change what you should do? Because you have this maybe weekly information coming into your inbox, and usually about specialized areas, but it can also be about a wide variety of areas like the Asylum. How does that also shift it when you're getting this information constantly being basically published and updated? Does a reference library become obsolete at that point? Excellent question. And then websites as well, like PCGS CoinFacts, if you're looking on the more US side. There's a ton of different websites which are just solid databases of information. And really astonishing to behold what kind of information is put together on these websites, especially if they're crowdfunded, or not crowdfunded, but crowdsourced information. Really, you can get quite an insane amount of detail and depth. So again, is it worth spending money to build up your reference library? Good question. And all of these are really fantastic and important sources of information. They really are. But they do leave the essential question, which I kind of been getting at. What should I, or what should you include in your reference library then? If there's all these sources of information available, what's even worth including? So we can kind of jump into it here. That's kind of the point of presentation today. So there's actually already a really good starting place that requires very little brain power on your thought, which is the Numismatic Bibliomania Society's top 100 list of U.S. numismatic literature. And I actually wrote an article for the NBS's a journal about my own path in trying to collect that top 100. And actually, you can see over my shoulder here, that is about perhaps like 50% of the collection right there. So it doesn't take up too much space relatively. But the top 100 list basically lists key books and periodicals and catalogs that should be basically a core library that are probably the most important pieces of numismatic literature relating to U.S. numismatics that you should have. And it's really quite a useful resource, and really forms that base of what should my core collection entail. The NBS Top 100 list is generally very affordable. I work on a pretty low budget relative to most collectors, and I was able to pretty easily acquire it, especially because I'm not just going for like first editions, right? I have some reprints and stuff like that, genuinely very affordable. And it provides a solid core library, like I said, and it has both breadth in terms of subjects and etc., but also depth. In the list, there's probably for any given subject, any given numismatic subject, there's probably maybe 3 places of overlap, and so you kind of get this depth as well, to make sure that you're not just getting surface level information. It's not just coins 101, but it's actually really getting down into depth for that reference aspect, while also still providing, again, breadth. And several of these resources are digitized on the Newman portal and elsewhere, but the majority really aren't. I think I did some kind of counting out there, and it's definitely a sizable majority that still are not fully digitized yet. And so this is another great reason to kind of bring this as the core of your reference library that you're purchasing, is that they are not yet available online, or at least the information compiled in that way is not yet available online. Going and being able to go back and choose a catalog from the John J. Ford collection, which actually I think is catalog online, so it's a bad example, but just being able to pick it up off the shelf and immediately reference it, always a very good thing. And so if you want to actually find a list for yourself, you can go to coinbooks.org, that's the NBS website, and there's a button right there for the NBS wiki, and that has the top 100 list. And actually what's great about the wiki is that not only does it have the list for you, but if you click on each item of the list, it details out the different editions for you, etc., and information about those, so you can become really no brain power, very little research required, just kind of see how you want to approach building this set. It's relatively easy, and can be acquired, again, relatively cheaply. So really, it's a core reference library, and it's always something you can check back on. I highly recommend it. Here's a little screenshot from the first 31. And so you can see the little links here, the little blue text. You can click on that link, you can just see all the information. But this is just kind of a good sampling of what kind of stuff's on there, right? You have kind of a more of a book, another book in number 2. But number 3 is a periodical, which is the Numismatist, and that, of course, is really key. Penny Whimsy is number 5, which, of course, is another U.S.-centric book. There's even sales as well, like number 8, which is the Garrett collection. Again, very iconic collection that sold. Great thing to reference, not only to track provenance but also pricing, and also just to see how this set was assembled, and really interesting information about that. The Eliasberg collection has been, of course, talked about recently because of the Hansen collection, which is growing. I think there was a Newman portal thing about that earlier here. American Journal Numismatics, always a very key reference. There's a couple of them right there over my shoulder, and of course it just keeps on going down. And as you can see, there's not only broad references like the Walter Brins Complete Encyclopedia number 1, but also more specific ones, more targeted ones, like number 17, which is about U.S. copper cents between 1816 and 57. So even if that's not your area of interest, that's part of the great thing about reference library, is that you can go back and reference that. It's a very iconic and useful work. It's always has, and it's a source of very good information. So that's why it's really a good part of your reference library, even if you're not collecting those cents. Also, the coins of New Jersey, number 18, or silver dollars and trade dollars of the United States, and number 22 there. Again, really good for reference. So let's talk about more broadly what kind of books you should be looking at for your reference library. Books are going to form the core of any reference library. They're that solid foundation. They're tomes of information, right? So they're really gonna, for most reference libraries, that's gonna be the centerpiece. And so what I'd recommend is that you focus on breadth first when you're acquiring books for your reference library. And kind of a good way, kind of a good strategy to think about making sure that you're having a broad library is to get kind of 2 books per subject. And how you define subject can kind of be up to you. That could be, let's say that could be, you say, I'm going to acquire 2 books per US coinage series. So I'm going to have 2 books about Lincoln cents, whatever. Or you could do it more broadly than that. You could say, I'm going to have 2 books about cents as a whole. Great. You could even do it kind of differently. We could say, I'm going to have 2 books about US coinage between 1900 and 1910. If you want to do that, or between 1900 and 1920, during the Renaissance of the American coinage. So you can kind of define subject how you want, but there's tons of different options. And that's kind of a good way to build that breadth out, is by having at least 2 per subject. And I would recommend even one broad book, one of those books be more broad and kind of more all-encompassing, and one be more specific, maybe more of a case study almost, or kind of more diving into the depth there of that series or that subject. And so that way you kind of get the best of both worlds. So maybe you, in terms of if you are getting 2 books about Civil War tokens, you have one more broadly about that time period of numismatics, then you have one more specifically about Civil War tokens or about a certain subset of Civil War tokens. And so what that allows you to do is not only have a good reference library, but also actually find things of genuine interest. So if you pick up that more specific book and you start kind of reading more in detail about these Civil War tokens, you're like, oh, these are actually really interesting. I'm going to start collecting these. So it kind of has a win-win benefit on both sides, but 2 books per subject is kind of a good base rule. Oh, and so as I kind of already said, again, breadth of subject, always a good thing to approach, but also get a breadth of type of books. You don't just want books that have pretty much solely pricing information. That's just not, that not only becomes somewhat outdated, but it's also just not that interesting and not as quality of a complete reference library as you can assemble. And so you want some with more of that story, that more narrative approach as well, kind of talking about either the research behind these coins or the stories around these coins. That actually is not only, again, interesting and engaging for yourself, but also better reference back. Whether you go, and if you, let's say you're writing an article about the series that you really enjoy collecting, like Double Eagles, having a thing where it's not just looking at pricing information, but you're looking at the broader context behind Double Eagles, always a great thing. And also breadth of publishing date. Don't just feel like you have to buy books published after 2000. There's actually a really lot of solid core references and basically classic references that were published well before then. The fantastic $1804 by Ken Brissett and Eric Newman, published in 1962. Still one of the best references on the $1804. So don't limit yourself in terms of publishing date. Limit yourself to what kind of books are the highest quality, the best that can meet your needs within a reference library. And then once you've already completed, but more ideally simultaneously, as you build out this breadth, you can also focus on depth. If you're collecting a certain series or if you have a very certain area of interest within numismatics, of which there's infinite, if you have a very certain area of interest, feel free to buy a bunch more books about that subject. Again, if you're really into Indian head cents, don't just limit yourself to 2 books. Buy a ton of them, right? Buy as many as you need to really build this reference library, and that'll be of more use to you because you'll likely be referencing more information about Indian head cents, and so it's always a good thing. And your interests likely will change over time. I'm sure most of you watching, your numismatic interests have changed over the years or the months that you've been collecting, and so as you go through and switch around your interests, again, buy books that reflect your interests as they change over time, and eventually you'll have a more expansive library that you can kind of track your line of interest through the years of collecting, and also have a solid and more expanded library about things that interest you. Pictures are also key when deciding which books to buy for your reference library. In my opinion, the internet still does not accurately portray the beauty of pictures in books. And so having them in your hand, and that can be pictures or plates, even if your book has a plate for some reason. I personally feel it's much better in your hand to be able to look at that picture. And so thinking about which books have really nice pictures that you want to be able to observe in person is another way to narrow down which books you want to include in your reference library. And then, so in 2016, in the fall 2016 issue of the Asylum, which is the Numismatic Bibliomania Society's journal. One of the members of the Numismatic Bibliomania Society wrote an article, actually there it is right there, about the Louisville versus Lawrenceville styles of collecting. And so Louisville is the one that focuses less on the content within the, like inside the book, and more on the outer beauty of the book, right? Deluxe editions, beautifully bound stuff, more looking at for the visuals than for the information. Versus the Lawrenceville style, which is all about the information. It can be the most beat up book ever. It can be just completely trashed, but as long as that information inside is good and helpful, that's how you build a collection. And so when you're building a reference library, you're probably going to be leaning more towards the Lawrenceville style. You're looking for that information over the beauty of it, because again, you're looking to reference back that information. You're looking to have that as a solid sort of core of information. But Lawrenceville style is pretty heavily affected, as described in the article, by digitization, right? Because a lot of this information that you're going to be seeking out is online. So if you're looking for really retaining a lot of value in your collection, it might make more sense to go for the Louisville style, buying these beautifully bound books, which is something you can choose to do. So it's up to you how you want to approach it, how you want to approach your reference library. Even the Louisville style books, even the ones that are really beautiful and no more emphasis on their physical look, they still tend to have really good information in them. So it's just another thing to consider in terms of how you want to approach building that reference library, is how you want to approach it aesthetically. The other thing I was going to say about books is that in terms of breadth of subject, this book right here, this bibliography, is really useful. It is published by the former wife of the Smithsonian director of the Numismatic collection, Elvira Klein Stefanelli. It's called Numismatic Bibliography. And it's important when you're getting these 2 books per subject not to exclude the rest of the world beyond the US, right? And this book is excellent for that. It has a lot of world books in there about world numismatics and metals, etc. And that is really key to not leave out, because a good reference library doesn't just limit itself to one country. So this book, if you are able to acquire it for not too bad amount of money, you will be able to reference it pretty easily and be able to build out your collection accordingly. Really good reference. Let's talk about periodicals as well. Periodicals are the opposite of books. Don't focus on breadth first, focus on depth first. Periodicals take up a ton of space, and especially the weekly ones, especially the monthly ones, they just take up a lot of room. And so you don't have really the flexibility, unless you have a 10,000 square foot library, to really buy every periodical that ever existed in its full set. And so what you want to do is focus on what are your areas of interest, and then which periodicals can I get that reflect my area of interest, and even beyond your area of interest, even for some of the kind of older periodicals like Rare Coin Review from the 20th century, those kind of things are always good references, just generally, and so maybe you choose to buy those as well. But getting every publication under the sun is going to be problematic for you space-wise. Depth is the key for that one. Periodicals are also, admittedly, often easier to utilize when they're digitized, like on the Newman portal. You can search for a keyword or a string of text and find it pretty much instantaneously, which is easier to do than searching through 10 years of monthly things and trying to find, where was that? I don't remember where I saw a piece of information. So they really are. So that's another thing to take in consideration is what's digitized, what's not, and how does that affect my search for information in terms of whether I should acquire this line of periodicals. So it's important to think about what you actually want in your reference library versus what you simply want to read. Feel free to subscribe to as many numismatic periodicals as you want. If you're subscribed to Numismatic News and Coin World Weekly and the Numismatist, etc., feel free. And especially if you're just reading it and really love learning about numismatics, I highly encourage you to actually do so. But in terms of what you read and subscribe to versus what you keep in your reference library, there's a Venn diagram there. There's only a few that should be in that middle of that Venn diagram, and it's really, again, where you want to focus your depth. It does not serve you space-wise, and it doesn't serve you information-wise to keep, in my opinion, 60 years of numismatic news. But for different periodicals. So with these magazines that you're reading but choose not to keep, like let's say you subscribe to your ANA member, and you subscribe to the Numismatist, and you say, hey, it's really just not worth it for me to keep these space because I have access to the digital edition via my ANA membership. Go drop it off at your dentist's office. Go drop it off at a school. Pass on that information too. So it's actually not only saving yourself space, but also maybe getting other people engaged in the hobby. Kind of a win-win. That's just one of many ideas in terms of how you can get rid of the periodicals that are just taking up too much space. And again, this kind of reiterates the same point. Subscribe to as many as you'd like, but be picky about what you keep. Be very conservative with what you choose to hang on to. And they also don't have to be current periodicals. I mentioned Rare Coin Review earlier. There's a lot of periodicals that were published for a limited time, like Numismatic Scrapbook, which have really solid cores of information. They're no longer published, but it's still really important for reference and is really important for building out that core collection. So whether it be a Numisma, which was published even longer ago, or a Rare Coin Review or whatever else, don't just limit yourself to ones that are still being published. In fact, it actually might be easier to do ones that have stopped publication because it allows you to complete that set and not have that space keep expanding. So you're just looking for good information, not necessarily the most 2021 publication. Let's talk about auction catalogs too. So again, you need to decide with auction catalogs whether you're going for more of the aesthetic approach, where you're looking for those beautiful deluxe edition auction catalogs, or for that information. It's up to you. And older catalogs are also really great to include in your reference library. Again, they have plates sometimes, and plates are ideal when seeing them in person. They're easier to observe, easier to appreciate. And so older catalogs is generally a good purchase. But also they can help track provenance pretty well. And so let's say you have a coin in your collection and you tracked it back through auctions through the years. Older catalogs, again, can really help you continue to track that back further, especially when they're not digitized. And newer catalogs are often available online, or not even the catalogs, but the Heritage Auction, the Stats Bar's website. They have this information about sale points and this narratives about the coins themselves. So they have huge online archives. So it's not as essential to get them the newer ones, but if you do choose to purchase more newer coins, which is newer catalogs, which is totally acceptable, be more targeted in your approach. There's a lot of catalogs in and out, like periodicals. There's a lot of them published. So, and they take up a lot of space if you get too many of them. So be more targeted in your approach. Maybe focus around the series that you're collecting. I met a guy once who just tried to collect he didn't have a 1913 nickel himself, but he actually was collecting all the catalog appearances of the 1913 Liberty nickel. And that was kind of how he focused his catalog collecting in terms of a reference library. So be more focused and go for depth again over breadth with newer catalogs. But it is up to you to decide whether you want to approach breadth or depth with the catalogs overall, right? You can go for a wide range of auction catalogs. Next to the top 100 list by the Numismatic Bibliomania Society is one of great breadth. But if you want to focus more on just looking at your coinage series for space reasons, that's totally acceptable. This is kind of up to you. Let's talk about ephemera too. So ephemera can be one of the most fun and informative parts of any library, particularly for bibliophiles who are mainly focused on collecting literature. And so ephemera can include everything from letters to contemporary ads, to binders of research, just kind of the weird stuff, right? And it can really be quite a joy. I have quite a bit myself. But its value in a reference library is somewhat limited. It's not nothing, but it is somewhat limited, and that's more just collecting it for its own appreciation rather than use as a reference. If you want to build a small collection of ephemera for your library, especially for your reference library, focus it more on your collecting interest. It doesn't help you to have huge random things of paper and random ephemera that don't really fall outside your interests. That information can be better found usually in books or periodicals. But contemporary ads, like in newspapers from 1958, or research that had not been published, or even letters between collectors, can actually be really useful references, assuming they kind of fall within your interest area. They can be useful just to kind of see what was going on at the time, and maybe for ads, for example, you can go back and see how much a coin was selling for at any given time. Or I know with the continental currency, there's that debate over looking at contemporary documents and journals and ads. Where do these continental dollars come from, right? And then of course, research binders have sold to auction for quite significant sums, but also they're usually not that expensive. Those are more exceptions to the rule. Research binders can be really helpful. Some of the best stuff was never published. Reference libraries can grow. Building your core reference library, utilizing that top 100 list, again, very key. And then the aforementioned mental mindsets in terms of buying these books and periodicals and catalogs and maybe ephemera. That's the most important step. You can really build that core library out, but there's 2 books per subject, really focusing on depth in periodicals and catalogs. And that can be really a solid core all by itself. And you would have a very nice reference library if you did that. But reference libraries are really flexible. They can change how you want. If you want to approach it a little bit differently than how I presented, absolutely feel free to do so. They're also as large as you want, as long as those you're living with allow you to make them larger, right? If you have a spouse or a family member who's living with you, they might have some limitations on how big they want your reference library to be, but you should not have any limitations on how big you want your reference library to be. It can really continue to expand as long as you want. And remember, as you shift collecting interests, you can kind of build your library around those collecting interests. So that will also be another great way for it to continue to grow and really, again, for it to be a better resource for you. And so kind of a good strategy for like thinking about how you want to even continue to grow your library, or if you want to, is when you acquire a new piece, buy a book about it. If I bought a double eagle from 1925, maybe I would then to accompany that, buy another book about double eagles, or buy a book more specifically about like middle date double eagles, or anything else like that, or even about gold coins as a whole. It's up to you. But building your library around new individual purchases not only allows you, again, to appreciate the purchase better, to be a better buyer in that purchase, but also just to have a good and easy mechanism for expanding your library and a good mindset to be in. So yeah. So where do you even find the things for your reference library, right? We talked about what's in there, but where are these things even to get into your library? One great resource is numismatic booksellers like Colby and Fanning or Charles Davis. They always have great resources, and even if their websites are both fantastic. And there's other booksellers as well. But if you can't find it on the website, oftentimes they're happy to help track down a book for you. So they're a great resource in that regard as well. So if you're looking for something, numismatic booksellers are kind of one of the first places you want to go. Also, the broader internet. eBay is surprisingly good at certain numismatic references, as are the forums and social media. You can always reach out to people and say, hey, does anyone have this for sale? And typically someone actually kind of will, if it's not the most obscure thing ever. Dealers from different specialties. So let's say you're looking for acquiring more books on Morgan dollars and peace dollars. Approaching a dealer about Morgan dollar and peace dollar books is really a great strategy to do so. They might actually have the book themselves that they want to sell to you. They might know where to find it, or they might know someone who has it who can sell it to you. Or they might say even, I know a better book that better fits your needs. So dealers are great as well. And kind of a bonus is, as you get to meet these dealers and in acquiring these books, you build that basic connections and you build that basic knowledge in a wide variety of fields, which will help further support your mission in learning about numismatics. And you can connect with the Numismatic Bibliomania Society as well. I mentioned coinbooks.org earlier. Becoming a member of the Numismatic Bibliomania Society, always a great way to kind of learn more about books and what you should and how you should approach collecting books. So that's always a great resource as well. So I highly recommend you do that if you're not already. And so not only can all these different places help you acquire the books, but they can help you decide what to pursue in the first place. You may think that you need one certain kind of book about proof sets, but someone of these different sources can say, hey, actually, I know of a better reference for you. I know of a better place that you can learn about this and build your reference library up. So let's talk about how to store your reference library as well. Get more shelf space than you think you need. This partially ties into the thing of the fact that it will likely expand, but also you tend to underestimate how much you'll need. So try and get kind of the maximum that you can. It's better to have more than not enough. Keep it close. It's for reference. Don't be keeping it up in your attic here where you're never going to check, or in some kind of like pool house if you have that, I guess. Like keep it close in your room or your office. There's one of my bookshelves there, and I have another one off camera, and another one off camera there, and there's more in the living room that don't fit my room. Keep it close. It's for reference. If you want to be able to go check it and utilize it, and if it's hidden away somewhere, you're not going to be able to do that. So keep that in mind. And figure out an organization system that works for you. That could be alphabetical, that could be subject-based, it could be by color, I guess. Figure out what works best for you to be able to quickly and easily access your books and your information. And not only access it in terms of pulling information for a research project or to learn about a specific coin, but also just for pleasurable reading. Ideally, in your reference library, there should be some books that you can just pull off the shelf and read for fun. That's always a good thing to consider as well when purchasing books. What can I just pull off the shelf and read for fun to learn more about the hobby, which I love? Protect it from the elements. If you live in a really humid area, keep that in mind. Maybe get a dehumidifier or something like that. If the books inside are ruined and the information is ruined, it's not much good to you as a reference library. If you have extreme temperatures in your area, keep that in mind as well. I have a little embarrassing thing for a story from when I was just starting book collecting, and some random cats in my house happened to discover books on the bottom shelf of a bookshelf and get scratching. So I learned my lesson about protecting books from cats as well. So if you have any pets, keep that in mind. You don't want your books all scratched up. And don't hurt your back. Some of these books are really heavy, so if they're up on a top shelf, maybe it's better to keep on a bottom shelf here, or at least take care of yourself here, right? Bend from the knees. So let's talk beyond a reference library. Reference libraries have a tendency, as I mentioned before, to become really an independent part of your collection. And as a result, they become kind of a valuable part of your collection, both monetarily and emotionally and intellectually. They become a valuable part of your collection. So they often go beyond a reference library. And so feel free to expand beyond a reference library if you like. If you find that you really do enjoy having these numismatic books, owning these numismatic books and periodicals and auction catalogs, feel free to become kind of more of a bibliophile. Buy books for the sake of buying books and for reading and for referencing, etc. It doesn't just have to be limited purely to what you're going to be checking back on. You can just enjoy books for the sake of having them, and I encourage you to do so. And feel free to utilize your reference library for other purposes beyond reference. If you're doing an exhibit at a show, judges really actually do like seeing books in that display case. They're supplementing the other pieces of your exhibit. So you're not only going to get a higher score, but it's also a great way to share what you have. And then sharing it, that can be either like physically, like handing off to someone to share with, or bring it to a show and crack open the thing and say, hey, look at these plates, or look at this information that I learned. Sharing is a great part of it. So I encourage you to do so. And if you have some grandkids over or something like that, and they have crayons and nothing to draw on, I guess you could also use it for that. So that kind of wraps up the presentation in terms of how to approach a numismatic library. That kind of sums it up, and it's always a very interesting thing to approach. Like I mentioned before in the presentation, it's largely self-driven. How do you want to approach it? And those are the kind of decisions that you have to make. But these are the kind of mindsets that you can put yourself in as you're making those decisions, and hopefully it'll pay off. That's about it.
Thanks a lot, Kellen. We do have a few questions. One asking for clarification on the author of a select numismatic bibliography.
Yes, so this is the full numismatic bibliography by Elvira Klein Stefanelli. I think that's how it's pronounced. She also did a select bibliography, which is right here. And this is kind of a slimmed down version. You can see a little bit different. But so it kind of depends what you want to go for. They're both great references.
All right, and then also a comment that both Elvira Klein Stefanelli and Vladimir Klein Stefanelli were instrumental in the care of the National Numismatic Collection, both curators, and Elvira, after Vladimir's death, was the executive director. Yep. For your current library, what are the key items on your want list right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I said, I'm at some of the top 100 set right now, because again, that's that core library, and it has taken me some time just because I am on a budget, right? So continuing to expand that collection, always something that I'm pursuing. But I really, I've given talks about this before. I'm always really drawn in about the stories behind numismatics. I do a lot on social media trying to engage with newer collectors. And what I do is I really focus on the stories. And I think I've given talks about that and written articles about that. Stories are what not only draw new collectors in, but also are like the most fun part of numismatics. Numismatics is so weird and it's so fun as a result of it. And so I really am always focusing on collecting numismatic literature that tells these interesting stories that either I haven't heard before or I want to keep in my library. And so I've been really focusing on expanding in that regard. What kind of interesting narratives can I do? So I buy less of those pricing-based books, and I just try and read as much as I can about the fundamental weirdness that is collecting.
All right, next question. What do you think is the best way to keep up on the digital articles? For example, eSylum, as far as retaining that information and searching it.
Yeah. So in terms of searching, I'll answer that second part first. On the eSylum, on the Numismatic Bibliomania website at coinbooks.org, there's a chance where you can actually search the text of the eSylum. So if you're trying to find a very specific thing, it's actually great, and it's been weekly for eons at this point. There's a lot of really good information, and by complete coincidence, in some of my other research in numismatics, eSylum has popped up as the main source for that, because there was some article written by some obscure figure 2 decades ago, one time, and it just works out very nicely. So it's great in that regard in terms of referencing back, and that's by definition digital, so it's great in that regard. But in terms of retaining information as well, to each their own, kind of, however works for you here. Me, I just kind of read through it all, and it works out. I know some people learn musically, so it helps to sing to yourself, maybe. Maybe that will help out here. Whatever works for you.
I have to tell a story here. The eSylum was launched in the 1990s, and at some point, Eric Newman looked at it and said, "Oh, this is a really good resource. We should print all these out." And so he told his curator to print them out, and he printed out the first 4 years of the eSylum in hard copy. It was a very, very large stack of 8.5 by 11 sheets of copy paper, and so they had their hard copy. All right, next question. What was the foreign coin book you showed?
Yes, so that was also the numismatic bibliography here. It does tend to emphasize more on foreign numismatics, and also medieval numismatics, and to some extent metals. And so there's a lot of world coin books are often kind of overlooked in terms of when especially U.S. collectors are building up their libraries. They tend to go for more U.S.-centric stuff. But having a world books referencing the world are super important as well. Obviously, there's like 193 other countries. It's not really feasible to do one for every country, but you can kind of approach buying your rule books however you want, either based on this bibliography that I just showed, or even saying, hey, I want to focus kind of on the really big countries like England and France and Spain and maybe Brazil, or however else you want to approach it. You can kind of decide. I met a woman once who was trying to get a book about numismatics from every country. It's kind of a lofty goal, but if you wanted to pursue that as well, again, it's up to your decision here. But that book is a really great reference for thinking about what you want to do.
All right, and then we've got another question here on the Lawrenceville versus Louisville approach to collecting numismatic literature. Can you give us a little bit more explanation on those two terms?
Oh, the Louisville versus Lawrenceville? Sure. So Louisville, so Joel Arose was the one who came up with that kind of designation here. And so basically what it's based on is there was a collector named Armand Champa who was based out of Louisville, and he was very much emphasizing the aesthetics of the thing. He didn't really care about the information inside. He just cared kind of about the beautiful binding of the deluxe editions, all this kind of stuff. Really gorgeous library, but how much was it referenced? That's in question. That is kind of the origin behind the Louisville story. And then the Lawrenceville was Scott Rubin, who is quite a numismatic researcher, and has purchased bucket loads and crate loads of catalogs throughout the year without as much regard to aesthetics, so much as what kind of quality information can we acquire through this thing. So, and he lives in Lawrenceville. So that's kind of the origin behind those terms.
All right. Next question. Please repeat the names of the numismatic booksellers.
Yes. So Colby and Fanning is one of them, and their website is excellent, as is Charles Davis. He does sales every so often and also has an existing retail website. Are there any other big ones you would mention, Len, that people should keep in mind here?
Yeah, and then yesterday we had, speaking at the NNP Symposium, also Howard Engel, who recently acquired Richard Stockley books in Canada. And he has many of the top 100 items in his
Yeah.
inventory as well. He's at Richard Stockley Books at mymts.net, or I think you can just Google him as well. So,
Yeah.
all right. Next question. Do you have any suggestions about building a reference library for metals based on an obscure theme?
Yeah, I do. So first of all, in terms of metals, overarchingly, the top 100 list actually has a good number of references on metals, and so that's always a really good thing to check back on because some of the best metal references are in there. In terms of metals, actually, if you're looking for a very specific what kind of things you should acquire, what I recommend is reaching out to the Metal Collectors of America. They're an organization that focuses pretty much exclusively on metals, has some of the most the best informed minds in numismatics are members of that. If you just shoot them an email, anyone in there, they can likely point you a direction based on your interests, and you can build up that reference library accordingly. You're going to get a lot of good information about what you should be pursuing.
Yeah. The Elvira Klein Stefanelli bibliography is also very good for metals. So if you want a list of the books related to Napoleonic metals, that would be a good place to check. All right, next question. Wizard Coin Supply is also a good source for numismatic books.
It is.
I've found that as well. They have a good stock of stuff. They carry all of Roger Burdett's publications, in addition to a lot of other books. Yes. All right. Next comment. I think it might be beneficial to say that the eSylum is not only free, but gives its readers access to many of the top numismatists from around the world. Any reader can submit their own questions and comments about any numismatic topic, and other readers will almost inevitably be able to provide additional answers, suggestions for further research or additional commentary. Full eSylum archive is also stored on the NBS website. Yes, absolutely. All right, next question. Are you finding more authors doing electronic publications? It is difficult to carry a mini library with you to shows or shops, but nice to have a PDF version to use on your tablet or laptop.
Yeah, electronic publications are becoming more and more of a force, not only because they're easier to produce and there's less like costs involved and less chance of kind of a monetary loss in the author's part, but also they're again really helpful to carry around. It's kind of the whole idea behind the Kindle, right? Is it's easier to just kind of carry as opposed to 10 books, one little thin thing, whether that be your tablet or whatever else. So electronic books do have their own value in terms of being able to kind of carry it around to wherever you need. But I'll always prefer the feeling of a real book.
Yeah, and for attributing coins, it's just so much easier to do it out of well-illustrated books, has been my experience. But the information is on the internet too. And the other trend I'm seeing is, it shows people will walk around with tablets and they might have pictures of their collection on there, or they might be using it for variety attribution or to look up prices, look up auction prices realized. So yeah, you see a lot more and more of this on the bourse boards. All right, we do have time for a couple more questions if anyone else wants to get in. Kellen, do you have any particular topics you're researching on or working on right now in terms of possible publications coming?
It's a good question. I think you'll just have to wait and see, Len.
Okay.
I'll let you know. No, like I said, I'm always fascinated by the stories behind these kind of things. So a lot of my research recently has been focused on just sharing those with other people, especially younger collectors, but also just in general, because I think that's kind of what's the most engaging for everybody, especially. And then once we get back to in-person events, hopefully here, then it might shift.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's always more and more information out there. The American Numismatic Society recently digitized all of its papers of the coin dealer Chapman, and I'm sure there are a lot of good biographical stories and information just waiting to be dug out of that archive. All right, next question for a new collector, how to find the good auction catalogs that you spoke about.
Yeah, good question. So going back to that top 100 list, there's a lot of really good, solid ones in there. I think, I don't even know, there's probably something like 20-ish catalogs, maybe 15 catalogs in there. Those are all really great. They're more US based because it's a US list, but it is really quite a solid assembly through the years of just really major collections. And that is exactly where I would start. I mean, it's everything from the Garrett sales, Eliasberg sales, which is by definition pretty much every coin made through the 60s here in the U.S. And a lot of other things as well are older like the John Story Jenks collection, etc. So that if you're looking for a place to start, that's where you're going to go. The top 100 list auction catalogs are kind of the more expensive ones, just because there were a limited amount made by definition, because they were kind of meant to be distributed for the auction attendees, but those are really good references. And sometimes there's not usually reprints, but I think there's a couple you could probably find reprints of that would be less expensive.
And I think they may also be talking about, where do you purchase these things?
Oh, yeah. So again, numismatic booksellers are a great place. eBay has a ton. A lot of people with more modern catalogs, sometimes collectors just want to get rid of them, existing bibliophiles, or not even bibliophiles, people who actually attended these auctions and they're just like, yeah, I don't have the space for it. So reaching out to people, always a good source as well directly. They'll tend to do it. And if you talk to a dealer, also, they might have some options for you as well.
Yeah. Also, the ANA book sale, which happens at the summer seminar
Yes.
every year, is an excellent source for getting a lot of for not very much money.
It's worth the price of admission here, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately canceled this year, but I do expect that event to be back in 2022. And by the end of the week, they really want to move the literature, so the prices keep going down. And,
those of you not familiar with the ANA book sale, 100% worth it. If you go attend summer seminar, like over the course of that week, they just have a room full of like heavily discounted books and periodicals and ephemera and auction catalogs. And as you go through the week, like Len said, it gets down to the point where it's like $5 a box. I think like it's very good deals, and you're going to find a lot of that. Probably a solid 5% of my library, 10% was bought just heavily discounted books at the ANA. They have everything.
Yeah. And they're taking a lot of donations too. So they, like everyone else, they need space. So they want to move things out.
Yeah.
All right. Next question, also related to space. How do you deal with the struggle of space versus disposing of some materials? Have you ever regretted disposing of anything?
Good question. I try really hard not to dispose things. It has been a years-long battle with my parents to figure out where I can expand my bookshelves into, and fortunately they're book fans themselves, so it hasn't been too much of a conflict. But when I do have to get rid of things, which fortunately I've avoided mostly so far, just kind of by being more specific with my acquisitions, in terms of prioritizing what I want, it's just kind of going back to what provides that core reference. What do I need to kind of keep as that core reference? Where are my interests around currently? And then looking at what's taking up the most space. And so I go from most space taking up to least. And as I go down that list, I say, like if I have to keep something, I move on to the next item on the list, and so on and so forth, getting progressively smaller. So the first thing I look at is like, man, I have weekly Coin World that takes up a ton of space. Is that my top priority to keep? And if I say no, then there we go. I'm gonna get rid of that. If it is something I want to keep, I move on to the next smallest thing, and so forth.
All right. Next, parallel related questions. Can you speak to how Newman Portal is digitizing periodicals? How often do they keep up with journals? And do we get cooperation from clubs and organizations for this?
Excellent question, Len. Do you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, we're getting great cooperation from the community in terms of contributing journals. A couple of weeks ago, we picked up state numismatic journals from South Carolina and Georgia. So yeah, clubs want to make their stuff available, and they are doing so. So that's great. And then there's a follow-up question here. Any work on things like Coin World, Numismatic News, that had very good articles in the day? Yeah, absolutely. We have digitized Coin World. It is not, unfortunately, publicly available. Coin World has not released all that content. Same thing for Numismatic News. It's been about 2/3 of it. It's been scanned, but again, Numismatic News has not chosen to make all that information information publicly available. But we have scanned it just because we do consider it very important, an archival function of what we do. It's important that there's a digital copy of all of that content out there. It is searchable. You can't get full view, but if you search it and you find something you really need, you can contact me and I can share selected articles on a fair use basis. And a number of people have taken advantage of that. So yeah, there's some really great content there. And it's a very large scanning job, about 3,000 issues of each, but you know, that's what we do. And so we've been happy to do that.
That's another great point, Len, is that like if you don't want to be keeping weekly numismatic newses in your library, you can search it on there by text, find which one is necessary, and then even track down even that individual one, whether that be by contacting Len for a virtual copy, or you can probably honestly just find a physical copy to keep for your library if you want to keep a specific article about a series you're collecting or something like that. So there's a lot of options for acquiring this information and keeping that as part of your reference library.
Yeah, and I don't personally save Coin World or Numismatic News. It's
yeah.
So
yeah.
All right. Well, we've got no more questions, so we will wrap it up there. And Kellen, thanks very much.
I appreciate it, Len. Thank you guys for all spending your Saturday mornings here.
Okay.
I guess it's afternoon for all the rest of you, but West Coast.
All right. Thanks, Kellen.
All right. Thank you.